Not born into privilege, no political connections, no prestigious college degree to pave her way. Yet few could have predicted that one day she would become a force the White House feared. Kaitlan Collins entered journalism with nothing more than a pen, an old laptop, and a dream many dismissed as naive. She was once an underestimated reporter, paid just $25 per story, wondering if her dream of setting foot inside the White House was too far-fetched. But eventually, she became the youngest ever White House correspondent for CNN and the only one bold enough to directly challenge President Trump on live television, earning herself the label of a nuisance in front of 3 million viewers. Today, Kaitlan lives in a $2.1 million mansion in Buckhead, drives a $140,000 Mercedes EQS, and is an essential face of American political broadcasting. The question is, how did someone once banned from press events for speaking up too much become the voice the entire nation now stops to listen to? Can a girl from the small town of Prattville, where life moves as slowly as a Sunday afternoon, overcome family expectations, career stereotypes, and lonely, freezing nights in the Capitol to one day stand at the White House press podium? Kaitlan Collins did. But before she became the face of CNN, she nearly gave up after her 10th rejection email in a row. Kaitlan Collins was born on April 7, 1992, in Prattville, Alabama, a quiet town where life passed gently by moss-covered porches, silent streets, and family-run corner stores. She grew up in a middle-class family with her parents and 4 siblings, Annalise, Kelsey, Braden, and Cole, in a small home that was always crowded but warm. Her father worked as a mortgage banker. Her mother, Tina, was a retired elementary school teacher who often told Kaitlan, "Patience might not give you what you want right away, but it will always take you where you need to be." Their house was small, so small that 4 bunk beds were crammed into one room. Kaitlan grew up in that tight space, learning to be quiet, to share, to be different. While other kids dreamed of staying in town with a steady life, she sat by the window clipping political news from local newspapers and dreamed of Washington, D.C., a dream her mom once joked was not on the map of Prattville. She was accepted into the University of Alabama and initially chose chemistry, a safe choice. But after a few months, Kaitlan felt herself drifting. Dry formulas couldn't hold her through the weight of tuition or the emptiness she felt walking out of lectures. She took a job at the campus library to make ends meet, wondering if she'd made a mistake. Then one day, she switched her major to journalism and political science, a decision that worried and even upset her family. "A journalist? In D.C.? You don't have connections," her father had said. But Kaitlan didn't turn back. She joined the Alpha Phi sorority, wrote unpaid stories for the student paper, and began building relationships. While her best friend Amy became an accountant in Montgomery, living peacefully in a 2-story home with a husband and 2 kids, Kaitlan packed her bags and took a risk on D.C., armed with only a few $100s and a belief no one else shared. Her first apartment in D.C. was cold, had no heating, and she had to share it with 2 roommates. She freelanced for small political blogs, earning $25 per story, barely enough to cover a decent meal. One winter night, after receiving her 10th consecutive rejection email, Kaitlan sat staring at her bank balance, exactly $50 left. She considered buying a bus ticket back to Prattville, but the next morning, she opened her laptop and started writing again, simply because quitting wasn't something she knew how to do. When she got hired at the Daily Caller, Kaitlan thought she had made it. But just weeks in, her editor harshly criticized her for writing a piece that was lacking edge. She nearly broke. Yet a week later, One of her brief analysis articles went viral, and for the first time, the name Kaitlan Collins was noticed in conservative media circles. Compared to Diane Sawyer, who rose to fame earning millions, Kaitlan was still writing for $25 apiece. But every word now carried the weight of someone who refused to be silenced. Kaitlan's journey reminds us of the moments when we, too, fought for our dreams, when everything seemed to push back. But perseverance won. The girl who once typed stories in an unheated apartment now stands in the White House press room, asking questions the world stops to hear. As Kaitlan would later say, how did a girl who once earned $25 per article become the most watched political anchor on CNN every night? Kaitlan Collins didn't come from the Ivy League, nor did she carry a name like Kennedy or Vanderbilt. But in just a few years, from a cold apartment with no heat, she made it to the White House press podium and eventually took over American primetime television. When Kaitlan stepped into the newsroom at the Daily Caller, she had nothing but belief and a spirit that refused to quit. She wrote news articles for $25 apiece, lived off instant noodles to save every penny, and learned to stomach rejection after rejection. Every press briefing was a battlefield, fighting just to be called on, crafting questions sharp enough, dangerous enough to make someone stop and answer. From the Daily Caller, Kaitlan joined CNN in 2017 as a White House correspondent. 4 years later, in 2021, at just 28, she was named CNN's youngest-ever chief White House correspondent, a milestone that earned her industry-wide respect. She didn't just show up, she led the coverage and helped set the tone for political dialogue between journalists and the most powerful figure in the country. In 2022, Kaitlan took on a new role, co-anchoring CNN This Morning, alongside Don Lemon and Poppy Harlow. It was her first time stepping away from the political front lines to face millions of viewers live each morning. Then, in 2023, with The Source with Kaitlan Collins, she became a primetime voice that cable news couldn't ignore. While Anderson Cooper, with his storied family background, had long been a CNN icon, Kaitlan was still fighting to get called on in a press conference. Unlike her colleague Jane at the Daily Caller, who preferred writing light stories to avoid conflict, Kaitlan ran straight into the political storm. She accepted criticism. She asked the questions that made the White House briefing room go silent. Not everyone likes Kaitlan. Some politicians say she's too bold, too unruly. But she didn't come to make them comfortable. She came to ask what others were too afraid to. At one point, she was temporarily barred from the White House for asking the president a question deemed inappropriate. The media called it a scandal. Kaitlan called it the job. To viewers who once watched Barbara Walters shape American journalism, Kaitlan represents a new generation. Direct, honest, unafraid of conflict, and unafraid of consequences. She's proof that the American dream still exists, just as we once believed it did. With her rising career came enviable earnings. With The Source, Kaitlan now makes around $3 million a year, excluding event deals and an upcoming memoir rumored to bring in millions more. Her personal net worth is currently estimated at $5 million, sourced from salary, investments, and media contracts. From $25 per article days, Kaitlan now owns a $1 million home in Buckhead, Atlanta, drives a brand new Mercedes-Benz EQS, and flies business class on international assignments. But she hasn't forgotten where she came from. In her luxury home, she keeps a single item from Prattville, a rusty old alarm clock, once placed beside her bed in that cramped childhood room. A quiet reminder that nothing came easy. From a freezing apartment in D.C., Kaitlan Collins has built a life of comfort, millions in earnings, a private home, luxury travel, and a best-selling book on the horizon. But what sets her apart isn't the numbers. It's how she holds on to sharpness and clarity amid the spotlight. In the living room of her sleek Atlanta home, among bright-toned furniture and abstract paintings, there sits one unlikely object, that old alarm clock from Prattville. It doesn't work anymore, but she's never thrown it away. Because sometimes, to understand where someone is, you need to know where they started. Not everyone sees this when they look at Kaitlan Collins on television. The piercing eyes, the calm composure, the words measured to the syllable. But behind the camera, behind the press briefings and political broadcasts, lies a life that is modern, refined, and so remarkable. Even she was stunned when she first stepped into it. The Buckhead Mansion, the quiet power of elegance. Among the graceful hills of Buckhead, often called the Beverly Hills of the South, Kaitlan Collins owns a modern villa worth over $1.8 million. It's where she chose to lay the foundation for her new life. Not a place for show, but a space for work, reflection, and steering the national news each night. The home embraces minimalist European design, with floor-to-ceiling glass windows, light-toned interiors, open spaces, and a private backyard pool. Part of the ground floor has been converted into a mini television standard studio, where she records remotely, rehearses her scripts, and reviews content before going on air. In the center of the living room hangs a photo from her first White House press briefing, not framed in gold, just simple and understated, yet more powerful than any boast. The hidden apartment in Manhattan, a retreat in the media frenzy. Although her main base is CNN's Atlanta headquarters, Kaitlan frequently appears in New York, especially during her time co-hosting CNN This Morning. Many believe she owns or leases a long-term luxury apartment in Soho, or the Upper West Side, neighborhoods known for housing powerful journalists, artists, and media personalities. If owned, the apartment could be worth between $2.5 and $4 million, depending on location and size. People who've spotted her in the elevator say she appears in neutral-toned wool coats, minimal makeup, but with a presence so composed and assured, the hallway seems to pause for a moment. Mercedes-Benz EQS, power that doesn't make noise. Parked in her Atlanta home garage is a brand-new Mercedes-Benz EQS 580, worth around $125,000, Mercedes' flagship electric luxury sedan. Not a flashy Ferrari or a towering Range Rover, Kaitlan chose the EQS for its quiet ride, minimalist interior, and MBX system that's as intelligent as she is. With Napa leather seats, 3D Burmester sound system, and a hyperscreen dashboard stretching like a spaceship cockpit. Everything is designed so the backseat passenger can read briefing notes or replay program recordings in studio-level sound quality. "I like things that help me focus," she once said. The EQS fits the bill, silent, sleek, and effortlessly commanding attention without needing to ask for it. A $1 million wardrobe, where fashion speaks without words. On screen, Kaitlan may appear in a neutral-toned blazer, but every item in her wardrobe is hand-picked from major fashion houses. From McQueen dresses, Valentino suits, Jimmy Choo heels, to delicate Cartier watches, none of it is overly flashy, yet each piece subtly signals her stature. When she debuted The Source, she wore a custom-tailored white suit from Milan, not revealing, not ostentatious, but with cuts so precise and silk so natural that even fashion editors took notice. For Kaitlan, clothes aren't just about image, they're statements. I know exactly who I am. Home studio, where the news begins before it ever airs. Part of the ground floor of her Atlanta home has been transformed into a personal 4K studio, with adjustable lighting, Neumann microphones, and a dynamic LED backdrop that can simulate political maps or CNN graphics on cue. It's where Kaitlan prepares meticulously for each broadcast, films exclusive segments, or joins high-level producer meetings remotely. In the world of television, where what happens off-camera is often more important than what's on it, Kaitlan brought the backstage right into her home. Traveling like Kaitlan, not to show off, but to slow down. You won't find her lounging in the Maldives or yachting around Capri like many TV personalities. Instead, Kaitlan picks quieter places. Marfa, Texas, an art town in the middle of the desert, where she once spent 10 days simply writing by hand and reading books. She also frequents Santa Fe, New Mexico, home to adobe homes and indigenous art galleries. These trips are off-grid, no social media, no check-ins, just black coffee, political texts, and handwritten speech drafts never aired. I don't travel to be seen. I travel to see myself. Vintage typewriters, a hobby for a slower world. In her home library is a collection of vintage typewriters from the 1950s to 1970s, including a Royal Quiet Deluxe once used by a war correspondent. She often writes by hand in the morning before turning on her laptop, a grounding ritual. Not a hobby for the masses, but for Kaitlan, it's a reminder. Writing is a deliberate act, and journalism should begin with thought, not shares. True luxury, found not in price tags, but in stories behind things. Kaitlan Collins may not own a $20 million mansion or spend weekends on yachts like Hollywood elites, but her lifestyle exudes a quiet sophistication few attain. Every item she chooses, from her car and home to her books and suits, reflects her personality. Sharp, composed, thoughtful, and never halfway. In a conversation with a colleague when asked, "What's the most expensive thing you've ever bought?" Kaitlan simply smiled. "Probably time. I spent a lot of it proving my worth. Now, I use my time to live by that worth." The old apartment on Capitol Hill, a mark of the silent struggle. Before owning her $1 million home in Atlanta, Kaitlan once lived in a small loft-style apartment on Capitol Hill, Washington, D.C., just a few blocks from the White House. It wasn't spacious or glamorous, but it's where she spent hundreds of nights writing news, reviewing documents, and rehearsing questions for political briefings. The apartment, believed to have been either owned or long-term rented, had exposed brick walls, dark wooden floors, and a tiny balcony overlooking the Capitol dome. If owned, it could now be worth over $1 million. A far cry from when she moved in with only a few $100s to her name. Kaitlan never flaunted the apartment, but those close to her know. It was the beginning of a journalism career built on integrity. Private life, black coffee, no sugar, and a quiet corner no one knows. Beyond the home studio, luxury car, and tailored suits, Kaitlan still holds on to a simple daily ritual. Every morning, before her work begins, she walks to a small cafe just 5 minutes from home. She always orders the same thing: black coffee, no sugar, to go. And no one there calls her a TV star. A former barista once shared, "She never said what she did, just sat in her usual corner, wrote in her notebook, then left, just like any regular customer." That's what makes Kaitlan Collins extraordinary. She stepped into the world of power without shedding the small habits that shaped her, like the old alarm clock she keeps from Prattville. Not for its price, but for what it represents. A humble beginning few remember, but one she will never forget. In a world where every word can become a weapon, only those brave enough to face controversy truly leave a mark. Kaitlan Collins doesn't shy away from scandal. She walks straight into the storm and emerges with even greater composure. You're not invited. Banned from the White House, 2018. In July 2018, during a photo op in the Oval Office, Kaitlan Collins directly questioned President Trump about his meeting with Vladimir Putin and the legal controversies involving his former attorney, Michael Cohen. When her questions were ignored, she calmly repeated them, firm but never disrespectful. Later that day, she was barred from attending a press briefing in the Rose Garden, with the official reasoning being her inappropriate questions. For the first time in years, a senior White House correspondent was excluded from an official event, simply for doing her job. For a generation that once revered journalists like Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather, this wasn't just a media incident, it was a reminder that real journalism is still fighting for its place. Kaitlan offered no retraction, no apology. She simply stated, "I asked what needed to be asked." While Anderson Cooper is known for calm restraint and rarely courting controversy, Kaitlan chose to ask the questions that shook the White House, even knowing the personal cost. "You're a nasty person," CNN Town Hall with Donald Trump, 2023. In May 2023, Kaitlan hosted the CNN Town Hall with former President Donald Trump, drawing over 3.1 million viewers, making it one of the most watched political programs of the year. But she wasn't just a moderator. She pressed Trump on the 2020 election, his legal issues, and controversial remarks. Trump interrupted her multiple times, and then, live on air, said, "You are a nasty person." The audience was split. Some felt she wasn't forceful enough. Others praised her courage. Kaitlan didn't lash out, didn't go on podcasts to defend herself, didn't argue online. She quietly returned the next night to host The Source, as composed as ever, like the nasty person moment had never happened. While Cooper built his name on stability, Kaitlan, as shown in the 2023 Town Hall, was willing to be called a nasty person to defend the truth. Internal clash, Don Lemon and the silence that spoke volumes. As co-anchor of CNN This Morning in 2023, Kaitlan, Don Lemon, and Poppy Harlow formed a high-profile trio. But when Lemon sparked outrage by claiming women over 40 were no longer in their prime, public backlash was swift. Though she wasn't the one who made the comment, Kaitlan found herself caught in the crossfire. Some expected her to criticize him. Others wanted her to show support. She chose silence, not out of fear, but because she understood that sometimes the most professional response is refusing to be pulled into what doesn't serve the work. Eventually, Don Lemon departed CNN. Kaitlan stayed, taking full reins of a new primetime program. And that was her quiet victory, one that required no defense. Unlike Don Lemon, who sparked controversy with his words, Kaitlan let her work speak for itself. Mangione 2025, when a small mistake becomes a media firestorm. In 2025, Kaitlan again became the center of attention after sharing a link to the legal defense fund of Luigi Mangione, a suspect in a sensational CEO assassination case. She later clarified that her post was meant only to share a source, not endorse it. Still, the backlash came fast. Within hours, she deleted the post, issued a clear explanation, and temporarily stepped back from social media. No one is immune to mistakes. But unlike many public figures who remain silent or shift blame, Kaitlan took responsibility and adjusted, showing a maturity forged in high-stakes environments. Her Mercedes EQS and $2.1 million home in Buckhead aren't shields from criticism. They're milestones earned by confronting errors, correcting course, and moving forward. For those raised on the legacies of Walter Cronkite and Barbara Walters, Kaitlan proves that real journalism is still alive, even if the price is being banned, insulted, or misunderstood. Through every scandal, she never collapsed. She didn't write a memoir to justify herself. She didn't launch a PR campaign. She stood firm, worked harder, and made her mark, not just on CNN, but in the hearts of those who believe the right question, asked at the right time, can shift the course of history. And more than that, Kaitlan is using her success to give back, from quietly funding scholarships to supporting press freedom organizations behind the scenes. Impactful acts that never make it to air, but change lives nonetheless. Anyone who's followed Kaitlan from the days she was barred from the White House to now, when her voice shapes national conversations each night, knows this truth. Resilience isn't about avoiding storms, but about learning to stand tall in the wind. And Kaitlan Collins, through every media firestorm, has proven this, not with noise, but with the quiet conviction of someone who truly knows her worth. Not everyone leaves a legacy under the spotlight. Some quietly sow influence over time through actions that go unmentioned. Kaitlan Collins chose the latter path, unassuming, yet powerful enough to shape an entire generation of young journalists. Supporting the next generation, when someone who once had nothing helps others start. Kaitlan has never forgotten her early days in journalism, when her budget barely covered a cheap cup of coffee. That may be why she quietly supports journalism students from underprivileged backgrounds, especially at schools like the University of Alabama, where she once studied, and other top journalism programs. Through personal connections and financial contributions, she has helped dozens of students cover tuition, internships, and living expenses in the challenging first steps of their careers. She never promotes these efforts, never hosts events to be honored, but those she helps remember it clearly. She didn't just help me pay for school. She made me believe I deserved to be a journalist, one student wrote. Defending the truth, not just on air. Beyond her personal efforts, Kaitlan also donates to independent organizations that protect press freedom, supporting reporters who face threats, suppression, or legal battles. While she doesn't publicize the amounts, several sources have confirmed that her contributions are considered significant. She also serves as an informal mentor to groups supporting young female journalists in the southern U.S., where career opportunities aren't always as accessible as in Washington or New York. From small Zoom calls to email feedback on articles or a few lines of encouragement, she does it all quietly, without fanfare. Inspiring, without a spotlight. Just sincerity. Though she's often invited to speak at journalism conferences, Kaitlan rarely accepts. She dislikes long speeches and resists being portrayed as a symbol. Instead, she frequently meets with journalism students, reads their submissions, and gives detailed feedback. A silent labor, without media coverage or cameras. In a private conversation, she once said, "I don't want to teach 1,000 people through a video. I want to truly help a few, with real time." That's Kaitlan. Not driven by fame, but by the values she truly believes in. A life philosophy, not loud, just steady. Kaitlan Collins doesn't try to be a feminist icon, nor does she attach herself to slogans. But the way she lives, sharp, steady, and silent when needed, has inspired many young women to see her as a role model. She doesn't chase the spotlight, but when she steps into the frame, people know she's someone you can trust. She doesn't talk about herself, but every action she takes reminds us it's still possible to do journalism with integrity and succeed. Kaitlan Collins doesn't call herself an influencer, but when those first students she supported walk into a newsroom, when a young reporter dares to ask a tough question at a press conference because of a message she once sent, that's a legacy, even if she doesn't name it as such. And for viewers who grew up with Dan Rather, Walter Cronkite, or Barbara Walters, Kaitlan represents a new kind of presence, composed like the past, grounded in the present, and carrying the true spirit of journalism. Unyielding, unsentimental, and always asking the right question at the right time. I don't want to stand out. I just want to be respected, because I did it right. That statement isn't just her professional philosophy. It's how she lives, how she reports, and how Kaitlan Collins is quietly building a different future for American media.